lot of what product that everyone has immediately come to, like Amanda said, let's make a virtual choir. Jill, in our pre-meeting, when we discussed to prepare for this, you had talked about how you were really focusing not so much on the virtual choir side. Can you talk a little bit about what your why is, what you want the outcome to be?
Sure, I'd be glad to. First of all, I tend to be a process person, so I focused a lot on the process. But interestingly enough, after my first meeting with my choirs or the choral leaders, I realized it was really important to them to know that these concerts have been rescheduled. And so I needed to communicate that so that they had a purpose for what they were doing, and they had made a commitment to these concerts, and they really needed to know they were going to happen. So we are working on rescheduling those. It was important that they knew I was working to reschedule those, and if they even need to be kicked down the road a little bit longer, the reschedule needs to be rescheduled. I think it's important that they know we're doing that. If it's not possible to reschedule, my plan is, and I have communicated this, to set up a concert somewhere in a local church in the community so that they get the opportunity to perform these pieces. But with that being said, I've set it up as rehearsals. I have early phase rehearsals, middle phase rehearsals, and kind of final rehearsals. I have focused everything, funneled everything through Canvas so that all assignments, and I've set them up as assignments, are through Canvas. So there are early phase rehearsals where they are recording themselves to individual rehearsal tracks that they upload. 2 weeks later, the next upload will be tutti rehearsals, tutti, with me in front of them conducting a video of myself conducting, and they are singing with that video, their part, and uploading it. And then third is kind of the concert phase, performance phase, where it is a recorded video of the same piece that they are uploading without me in front of them necessarily. But I'm just trying to give them, you know, they each learn in a different manner, obviously, so to give them something to grasp. The other thing I needed to be aware of is that these personal check-ins with them are really important. So I've scheduled one personal check-in or one check-in a week through Zoom. Part of what we do, at least I feel like in my choirs, is develop leadership. And so it's really important that I am not the only one who is hosting the meeting, but that moves around to different leaders within the ensemble. So I'm trying to focus on that too, but they really obviously need that connection, and Zoom has given us that piece. So I will possibly go to the virtual choir. I had a lot of questions from students. For me, it's something that my grad students are really great at, so I'm sure one of them will be able to at least start working on that for us. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I'm trying to come up with a rehearsal process that emulates what the real process is, and use those virtual check-in times to talk about where did you have problems? Or when you upload your video, could you also just put a little sentence where you had problems that maybe I'm not picking up on when I'm listening to your video? So we could talk about troubleshooting as well.
Absolutely. I mean, this is all different processes, and you're talking about replicating the rehearsal process. I think that Brandon, also speaking as someone who is working with music education students, he talked about that process being really an important outcome of this why. So Brandon, do you want to talk about how you're going through with that?
Yeah, I did something similar to what Stephen did. I used GarageBand. I took a recording of a piece and I basically played the parts in GarageBand. So I made 3-4 separate tracks and highlighted the parts in GarageBand over the recording. In fact, Amanda, it was your recording with the TCDA SSAA Honor Choir, which is fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
But I slowed it down first because, I mean, it's fairly brisk and some of those jumps are pretty disjunct and those harmonies are quite tight. So in order to help them learn that, I slowed the track down in oh gosh, what's that program called? It escapes me for the moment, but it'll come back to me. But I slowed the track down. Audacity is the program. Audacity. You can do a lot of great things in that program that you can't do in GarageBand. So I slowed the track down, then imported that into GarageBand and played each part over the recording, the slowed version of the recording, so they could practice. And then from there they can upload. I'm having them sing with the track and or without, and then they can upload those to the forum that we have. We use a program called Sakai, which is similar. We're kind of phasing that out, but it's similar to Canvas. And that's how I was starting to go down the path of a lot of writing and a lot of narrative stuff to have them be reflective, but I've opted to not do that as much, and to make it more performance based.
I think I'm going to divert a little bit. I thought there was something that was interesting to me that Stephen had brought up in our pre-meeting in preparation for this. You had talked about not wanting to have so much writing, and I thought it was interesting that administration at Arkansas talked about not having that, or really making a mandate about that. So Stephen, can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, so at Arkansas, I also serve as chair of the faculty, which is our term for chair elected to the Senate. So I sit in all the executive meetings and whatnot. And so I kind of had two different visual cues on what was happening. I had the kind of the big umbrella part of the university. I also had the microcosm, which was happening in music. And what happened at the macro level, above all of the deans of the colleges, is that the provost and whatnot were really concerned that a lot of classes that don't necessarily have major writing components with them would all of a sudden be burdened with writing assignments that professors were then creating for that class, where they wouldn't have otherwise existed. And so the students at the beginning of the semester, they take English and they take math and they take music, a choir, and they take, I don't know, insert some other class here, right? And one of those classes is a writing component class. One of them has a lab, one of them is performance-based, etc. Well, if we all go online and then all 5 of them become writing component classes, then it's very unfair to the student, who now has not just one 10-page paper to write, but 10 10-page papers to write, or some other fashion of writing. And so we were actually told, listen, if your course is not writing intensive, don't make it writing intensive now as a way to compensate. Find another way to get your course material to your students without turning everything into English 101, because the students just aren't going to be able to write that much that quickly. We've got 5 weeks left in the semester, and there's only so much that they can do during that time.
I have 2 questions that I think are really great questions. So let's see if we can field those, so we can field more questions quickly. This one is, and I think we've answered it, this one kind of in a broad spectrum, but if anybody has any specific answers. I'm not so tech savvy. It doesn't seem easy to teach them new repertoire, especially since we won't be meeting together at all. The virtual choir experience seems difficult for me to pull off. What are some other ideas that might engage students for 10 weeks where we cannot work on repertoire so easily? Does anybody feel ready to speak about that?
I'll field it. Just real quick, I think what could work really well, because everybody has access to YouTube and there are so many good recordings of choirs on YouTube, is even if they're not recording, if you can pull 4 different or 5 different recordings of a piece that they would have performed, and then say, here, watch choir A, choir B, choir C, choir D, and choir E. Tell me in 50 words or less, which one is your favorite and why? Or which one did you think was the most beautiful? Which one did you think was the most aggressive? Which one did you think, so really short answers, not writing assignments, right? Which one was the most elegant? Which one was the most aggressive? And that allows them to listen to different things. They're learning by listening, and then be able to put it in perspective music that they would have performed anyway.
I know I'm particularly doing that because it teaches a lot of critical listening, which is something that maybe students might not do inherently. Another question, and actually leads us exactly to where we were going next in our thought process. Their question was, so much of what is being suggested requires a really strong internet connection and computer power. How are people supporting and accommodating students who might be in disadvantaged circumstances? And the thing we were going to talk about next is the different platforms. As we saw in our survey, a majority of us are using Zoom. Let's answer this question and also perhaps talk about some advice on these platforms and maybe some restrictions that students might have.
I can just talk about a real world experience I had today. I had 2 conducting lessons this morning with my graduate students, and Zoom failed on us both times because of internet connections on their end. So in that case, I just went to the phone and we just had to proceed by phone. But I'm making myself available to students by phone when necessary so that they can still at least be connected to me and the content as best possible. So that they aren't completely shut out. I haven't had that experience often, but for whatever reason, it happened twice today. So it was like, okay, what are we gonna do now? But most students at least have access to a phone, and a lot have FaceTime. And so if I'm just opening myself to them, if we do some one-on-one work, I've told them that that's okay too.
And I agree with Amanda. Flexibility is incredibly important here. I know I have some students who, for example, will have trouble pulling things up, or they may have one apparatus where they can pull up the sound, but they don't have a second one where they can actually record while they're playing the sound. So really, for this to be effective, they need 2 devices, at least for my particular plan. So, you know, my advice to them is if you can't get it to work, just upload what you did in your rehearsal time, how you spent your time, where your problem spots were. And there's an element of just trusting them and keeping it simple and honest.
Elise Hepworth also said, and she's going to be in this webinar on Friday, asynchronous and incorporating asynchronous and synchronous experiences, because the digital divide is definitely something that separates demographics. Corey Evans at Utah State had said that they're creating a music video where each student films themselves in nature so they can social distance. I think that's super cute. So I just thought I'd throw that out there, engaging the chat. But Stephen, you were going to say about this digital divide, different platforms?
Yeah, so Arkansas is a rural state and a small state too, only about 2.8 million people. So unlike a place like Rutgers, where there's total Wi-Fi saturation in the New York City area, right? In Fayetteville, if the students are still on campus, they have internet. But as soon as they go home, a lot of them are going home to pretty rural places where the Wi-Fi is spotty. And we've had a number of, we'll call them concerns, perhaps leading towards complaints about students once they're going home, they don't have the reliable internet connection to maintain video. And they find themselves going to local coffee shops or something where they can get public Wi-Fi. And that only worked until last Thursday, which was now, 5 days ago, when the governor of Arkansas said, okay, all public spaces are closed. Oh crap, what do I do now? I don't have the Wi-Fi at home. There's nowhere I can go. I can't be on campus. I can't go to Starbucks. And I only have limited data on my phone. And so there, I think it's up to us as the teachers to be as flexible as possible and believe the students if they say, listen, I just don't have Wi-Fi that can support video. Okay, well, what can you support? If we can support audio only, like Amanda said, I think a phone call is really, really great. If you can't support, if you're in a place where you don't even have that, maybe written assignments of some kind, text message based, sending YouTube videos so they don't have to use nearly as much data. I think it's up to us to be flexible, especially for those of us who are teaching in more rural areas.
Awesome. Anybody else about the question about maybe different advice on platforms, things like that?
I don't want to put words in Stephen's mouth, but I want to say that what you said yesterday when we had our pre-meeting was really, really thoughtful about the dangers of choosing one thing and not having done enough homework and having enough bandwidth and such to support it. And I just really think that what you said there hits the nail on the head.
Yeah, and to follow that up, and thank you for reminding me that I said that, Brandon. And so some of the platforms require more data than others. So Zoom, for example, has a pretty high bit rate. You know what the lowest one is actually Facebook Messenger. If you have 3 little bits of data floating around in the air, you can get a pretty good video signal through Facebook Messenger. But Zoom requires a pretty decent signal. Also, Zoom is a public company, and so most of their best features are put behind the paywall that the students are, now they have to register for an account and whatnot. So, maybe do a little bit of research. At Arkansas, where the university pays for the Microsoft suite, so the students are already in Microsoft Teams, and we can use Teams. It costs the students nothing. They don't have to sign up for anything. And so I encouraged all my students to get to know that one piece really, really well. And the rest of us were also encouraged to do that, so that the students didn't have one class on Zoom, one class on Skype, one class on Teams, one class on Blackboard, one class on, and et cetera, where now they're managing 5 or 6 different softwares, not realizing that their internet connection might be okay for one, but not for the others.